Friends, in this video we shall learn about the chapter 5, that is expansion and consolidation of the British power in India. The very first topic is British imperial history. Here we shall learn that the Britain's imperial history basically can be divided into two phases. The first phase mainly focus on the territorial expansion in the Atlantic region, which includes the Americas and the West Indies. Okay. And in the second phase, the main focus of expansion will be towards the East Asia and Africa. So see, Britain's entire empirical history can be divided into two main phases. The first empire was extended across the Atlantic towards the Americas and the West Indies, and the second empire, beginning around 1783 with the Peace of Paris, and was moving towards the East Asia and Africa. Now, Peace of Paris refers to the treaties that were signed in the year 1783, and it ended with the American Revolutionary War. And this Peace of Paris was signed between the Britain and the United States. And here the American will get their independence, and other agreements were done, including Britain making peace with France, Spain and the Dutch Republic. So the key point of Treaty of Paris was Britain would give or free United States of America, and so America was declared as independent country. The new boundaries were established for the United States, extending west to the Mississippi River, and Britain returned some territories to the France and Spain. So Peace of Paris marked the end of the British rule in its first phase, that is in the Atlantic region, in the America and West Indies. Now the British will mainly focus in expanding its territories towards the East Asia and Africa. Britain's imperial history began with the conquest of the Ireland in the 16th century. So Britain has its first colony got established in Ireland, and this was the beginning of the British imperial history. Okay. So Ireland was the first colony established by the British in the 16th century. The English then emerged as a new Roman, and after the Enlightenment, the English began to portray themselves civilized in comparison to the Orient and other peoples. So here Orient refers to the eastern region of the world, especially Asia, and which includes the country like India, China, Japan, Middle East. So here are some explanation. Okay. So British viewed themselves as superior or more civilized, and later they used to justify their rule over other regions that they are superior and they have to civilize the other area which is under civilized or backward places. Okay. Now here is the question that why did the British consider themselves as New Roman? And answer to this question is that the British admired the Roman Empire for its strength and organization. They saw parallel between their growing empire and the Rome dominance. Okay. And just like Rome was, just like during those days, Rome was used for the symbol of civilization and order. The viewed their empire as a force for bringing progress to other regions, just like Rome. So they are calling themselves as New Roman, who would take steps for the progress of other nations as well. Okay. And this is why they would portray themselves as civilized in comparison to the Orient. Orient stands for the countries in the East. That is especially the country of the Asia or Africa. So, Eastern people, compared to the Eastern people, British would consider themselves as more civilized. And for Britishers, these Orient and other people are uncivilized. Okay, so this was the thing. They would consider themselves superior as compared to the others, and they would take the responsibility on themselves to make other country also civilized. This was their thought. Okay. Now next question is, was the British conquest accidental or intentional? Was the British conquest accidental or intentional? So according to John Seeley, the British conquest of India was done blindly, unknowingly and accidentally, and in an absent-minded manner, which is not at all accepted by many of the historians, because according to the charter given by the Queen of Britain, the British East India Company could expand their territory and even occupy if required. It was mentioned in the charter. So, unknowingly, accidentally, or absent-minded manner, they had to acquire the territories of India could not be accepted. But according to John Seeley, the British conquest of India was done blindly. They were not knowing, and accidentally they had started controlling over the political system of India and then acquiring territories like this. So this school of thought argues that British came to India to trade and had no desire for the territorial expansion and were reluctantly forced to occupy those territories due to political turmoil and created by the Indians themselves. So according to John Seeley, they had to occupy the Indian territories because of the political turmoil created by the Indians themselves. Okay. But the truth is that they started interfering in the local administration, and further by fortifying and then by forcing to trade duty free, custom free, and finally by defeating the Nawab of Bengal in the Battle of Plassey in 1757, started acquiring the territory and would get the Diwani rights as well. Okay. So this was the thing. The second group says, so this was the first group where John Seeley says that unknowingly they have had to acquire the territory. Okay. In India. They had no desire, but they were reluctant, but yet they had to occupy. The other group says that the British came to India with a clear intention of establishing a large and powerful empire, and a plan which they carried out bit by bit over the years. So other group says that British had the intention to establish large and powerful empire. Okay, the first phase was over, and now the second phase of territorial expansion would start in the East Asia, including India, Africa, and East Asia. Okay, countries of the East Asia. So initially companies officials began to acquire territories simply to promote and protect their trading interests. But when they saw how easily they could pit one ruler against the other, they started interfering in the local politics. So we can see how the Britishers turned from traders to rulers. First, their priority was to trade and to set up their factories to trade with valuable goods like spices, cotton and silk. And so they established trading posts and sought to ensure smooth business operation. Now the company would notice that the local rulers and the kingdom often had conflicts and rivalries. Now what Britishers will do, they will support one ruler against the another, and thus they gained influence and control over other territories. For example, they provide military support to local rulers in exchange of the trading privilege or land. Like this, over the time, the company shifted from being a trading organization to a territorial power, and this marked the beginning of the British colonial rule in regions like India. So this is how the transition happened from British, just a company to trade, to the empire to rule. Okay. Next is use profit from the trade in the East, especially in India, increased their desires for profit, personal ambitions and greed, along with the political development in the Europe, forced the British to increase their political influence in India. According to B.L. Grover, Lord Wellesley resorted to aggressive application of the subsidiary alliance system to extend British dominance in India as a defensive measure against the imperialist designs of the France and Russia. British intentions from 1798 to 1818 were deliberately imperialist. Lord Hastings carried forward Wellesley's policy and treated India as a conquered country rather than the acquired one. So Britishers would make huge profit from the East, especially the country like India. By trading the goods like spices, cotton, silk, they would make huge profit. Okay, they would take the raw material at a very low cost and would make finished good from their own country and would sell them at a high profit. So personal ambitions and greed along with the political development would increase, and this would force the Britishers to increase their political influences in India. Okay. Now, Lord Wellesley's subsidiary alliance system would force the Indian ruler to accept the British troops for protection and give up control over Indian foreign relations. So, according to the subsidiary alliance, Britishers' military expenses would be taken care by the local ruler, wherein they would in return provide protection against the neighboring ruler, and also the Britishers would take care of the external affairs as well, that is over the foreign relations as well of the kingdom, where subsidiary alliance would be signed. Okay. And this is how Wellesley would increase the British dominance. Later, the Lord Hastings would also follow Wellesley's policy and treated India as conquered country rather than the acquired one. And thus India's resources would be used to serve the British interest. Okay, so India was considered by the Hastings as conquered country and not the acquired one. This means India was not a partner or ally. It was treated as the conquered country and was used to serve the British according to their need and interest. Okay. So this is how they will make huge profit for their country, British, and trade was going on, but it would not benefit India's growth. Okay. So this was the thing. When did the British period begin in India? Now next is, when did the British period begin in India? Different historians have different opinion in this regard. They consider the following years as the beginning of the British period in India. Okay. So now understand that different historians have different opinion in regards that when the British period begin in India. Okay. So in year 1740, when English-French rivalry began. Now we have already discussed how the English-French rivalry in India began around 1740, as both the nations were controlling over the trade and trying to compete with each other. Okay. So basically both Britain and the France had established trading companies in India. We all know that British East India Company was founded in the year 1600, whereas the French East India Company was founded in the year 1664. Yet these companies compete with each other for their dominance over the trade, especially for the spices, textile and other valuable goods. Okay. Now we have learned that there was War of Succession, Austrian Succession from 1740 to 1748, also known as 7-Year Wars. Okay. And next was the 7-Year Wars from 1756 to 63. So these Carnatic War, these were called as Carnatic War. That was the extension of their conflicts, like the War of Austrian Succession and the 7-Year War. So Carnatic War was the extension of the war that was going in the Western countries. Okay. Now in the South India, the British and the French will fight with each other, and in 1746 the French under Dupleix would capture the British controlled town of Madras in India, and this was the major victory of the French. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748 brought an end to the war, and Madras was returned to the British in exchange for the French receiving the town of the Louisbourg in Canada. So this was the thing. But over the time, the British would emerge as victorious, especially after the Third Carnatic War. And the French influence in India diminished and the British became the dominant European power, paving the way for their colonial rule. This rivalry played a very significant role in shaping India's political and economic history during the 18th century. Okay. Now, in the year 1757, when the Britishers defeated the Nawab of Bengal, in the Battle of Plassey. So see, some historians viewed that British began its period in the year 1740 because in the Third Carnatic War, British has proved its supremacy over the other European powers. So some consider its beginning in the year 1740, whereas some consider British period began in 1757 because in the Battle of Plassey 1757, The Robert Clive defeated the Nawab Siraj-ud-Dowla of Bengal in the Battle of Plassey, and this victory gave the British control over Bengal, which was one of the wealthiest and most important region of India. And after this battle, the company established the political control over the Bengal and began using it as a base to expand further into India. It got the Diwani rights as well. Okay. So this is how after 1757 British started to establish direct political and military control over the vast area of India, making the start of a more structured and colonial power rather than just a trade-based influence. Okay. Next is the year 1761. When Ahmad Shah Abdali defeated Marathas in the Third Battle of Panipat, however, all such chronologies are somewhat arbitrary, as the political changes that began around that time took approximately 80 years to complete. In fact, this was the period of Indian history which it would probably be a mistake to interpret in terms of what we currently know. However, the circumstances under the British succeeded are not clear, and the few obstacles they faced were not of serious nature. Now, some historians believed that British power began in India in the year 1761. So, in 1761, Marathas were defeated by the Ahmad Shah Durrani and thus weakening their power. After this defeat, the Mughal were able to regain some influence, especially in the northern India, and Shah Alam II was the Mughal emperor, but his power was limited, and the British held the Mughal emperor, but the Mughal name and legacy still mattered politically. Although the Mughal empire was no longer that strong, but Mughal influence remained in some area after the defeat of Marathas. Mughal were no longer in full control, but still they had a symbolic presence. So this is how British East India Company will use the Mughal legacy to strengthen their own control over India. Okay. Even though Mughal Empire itself had ceased to be a dominant force, but yet it has a very limited power, and British would control India